Morning, Tri-Cities. It is 9 o'clock on Friday, so it's time for Coffee with Karl. I'm Karl Dye from TriDeck, and today we are joined by some very, very valuable guests from the United Way of Benton and Franklin counties. We're joined by Dr. LoAnn Ayers, who is the president and CEO of the Benton and Franklin United Way. Good morning, Dr. Ayers.
Good morning, Karl.
I want to make sure I got the title right. United Way of Benton and Franklin counties, because I was just going to say United Way, but from now on, we'll just say United Way, and it'll be easier for me to describe it. Thanks for joining us this morning. We're also joined by Charles Simpson. He is the Community Impact Committee Chair for the United Way and also Vice President of Strategic Intelligence for CPC Company. Good morning, Charles.
Hey, good morning, Karl.
Did I get all your titles right?
Yeah, close enough. So
okay.
Out with the Central Plateau Cleanup Company, and what I'm really here to talk about is the role we play over at the United Way. So you got it.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, both United Way and CPCco are great partners of ours at TriDeck, and so we're excited to have this conversation today. We'll kick it off with our coffee mug stories, and I was telling you guys before we went on that I've got a limited number of coffee mugs. So anybody that may be watching, if you want to give me a coffee mug, I'm happy to plug your organization or company. But I've got this one, which is, it says Tri-Cities Washington, which is kind of the logo that we share with Visit Tri-Cities and the Regional Chamber of Commerce. But I picked this one this morning to really talk about our community. Everybody, Charles, you grew up here, and Dr. Ayers, maybe we'll find a little bit more about your background. I'm a newcomer to the Tri-Cities. But I think the mug represents our community, and that's what we're really here to talk about today. All parts of our community. How can we support each other? I think a community is just like a family, and I think you guys do such a great job, helping specific parts of our family or our community, if you will. So that's my mug or coffee this morning, mug this morning. Dr. Ayers, what about you? Do you have a mug or coffee story for us? You said that you told us you're a coffee connoisseur, so what do you got for us?
Well, thank you, Karl. And you can just call me LoAnn. I am really excited because I have my proud Navy mom mug with me. My youngest son, it was active duty for 8 years. And I got this when he graduated from boot camp and used it every work day for the entire 8 years. So I won't show you the inside, but faithful mug. He is now at Washington State University. Go Cougs. Because he was in cybersecurity and IT when he was in the Navy. So
oh, wow.
Had to put in that Coug plug because my other favorite mug, of course, is the awesome Cougness that I have with me every day. Right, Charles?
That's right. That's right.
We have this ongoing conversation, Charles and I do, just to make sure that there's diversity in the world between dogs and Cougs.
For sure. Yeah, it's very important.
And we're going to come back to that, I'm sure, at some point in this conversation.
Charles, how about you? Now I'm assuming, let's see what you got. You got a husky mug for us, or what do you got this morning?
Well, no. So I actually went with LoAnn's theme unknowingly. I let my youngest son, I have 2 children, a daughter and a son, pick. This is the one that he picked. And I will admit that choosing a mug was probably the hardest part for me because I'm not a coffee drinker. Not at all. I was getting very nervous about which mug to choose. So I scrambled, running around the house. I grabbed my 4-year-old and I said, which one, Kyle, should we go with? And he picked the mummy mug, undoubtedly in honor of what is one of the Simpson household's favorite holidays, which is Halloween. So this is the one I'm going with. It's actually full of Diet Coke right now. So I am getting my caffeine fix just in a different way this morning.
Well, and I have to do a shout out to a local business because I have the Wheelhouse Blend from Rockabilly Roasters, downtown Kennewick. Awesome local business.
Oh, that's awesome. And, just in the spirit of here in the Tri-Cities, we're right in the middle, sort of, in between, WSU and UW. We can have that Apple Cup or the WSU Husky discussion. And I wanted to throw out there because I think, Charles, you had a reminder on your whiteboard back there, but I got a brother-in-law that played football for the Huskies back in the 80s. And so I grew up like as a Husky, and now I'm married to a Coug. And so we saw each other last weekend and I was wearing some Coug colors. He goes, "Man, you kind of flipped, didn't you?" And I go, when you live with Coug, you kind of got to, go with whatever you got. And on the Apple Cup, I just have to share quickly, the first one that I was at, I forget if it was like 81 or 82. It was in Pullman, and from what I can remember, it was about 20 degrees below zero. And we were in the Husky section because we got, tickets from my brother-in-law. We were like in this narrow, part of Martin Stadium was a lot smaller back in those days, kind of back in the end zone with the rest of the Huskies. And ironically, the Cougs won, and that was the year that they did tear down the goalposts and throw it in the creek. And we were there as, wearing our Husky stuff and freezing and, being defeated. So I know it's a lower number, but it was a huge day for the Cougs. So I got to share that Apple Cup memory with you guys.
And I will, you mentioned the whiteboard, not me, but since you've gone there,
right.
Follow suit. When you can't celebrate quantity, you have to celebrate quality. So I'm not going to hold it against the Cougar fans or pulling down a goalpost. But the whiteboard, as you mentioned, it does document that currently the University of Washington is sitting at 74 wins. The Cougars are sitting at 32. Maybe that'll change this year. My guess is it will, and that 74 will go up to 75, but we'll see in November.
And that's why we're undefeated fans.
A great way to sum it up.
Cheers, LoAnn.
Well, let's get into our discussion. LoAnn, do you want to give us maybe like a general overview of the United Way in the Tri-Cities, maybe a little bit of the history and background, and kind of a little bit about mission and vision? Let's start off with that.
You bet. Well, our United Way is a local nonprofit, so we are a separate legal entity, and we're part of a network that stretches around the globe of over 1,400 United Ways. And so that gives us some great advantages of the system that we can tap into for training and protocols and procedures to make sure that everything we do has the highest value for our local communities. And as a farm girl, I'm committed to squeezing value out of every single dollar we get, because we know that people work hard for their money. And we want to make sure that we leverage local gifts by bringing in outside money when we can, so that we can have greater benefit. Our United Way was started in 1958. So it has a long heritage of really making a local difference. And in the late 90s, the building that I'm sitting in was really built as a community effort. And we are mortgage free, which again means we don't have to spend rent money. And we also have half of our facility that was built with a lot of support from the trades, so that nonprofits could use it for meetings, celebrations, trainings. It's our nonprofit training center. So it's about half of our building here, right next to the Cancer Center off of Columbia Center Boulevard in Kennewick. And of course, during the pandemic, we were closed. So we actually did a pretty great pivot of that space, because we worked with Greater Columbia Accountable Communities of Health and our local public safety officials, connected with FEMA. And we have helped local nonprofits place orders, and they come to us in pallets with over 1 million pieces of free PPE. Wow. So that training center turned into a PPE depot. In fact, we got what we think is our last shipment from the state of 300,000 pieces on Tuesday. So we have volunteers who are sorting those out so nonprofits can come in. And that's just one example of, how we look at what's the need, how can we creatively fill a gap? Because that's what we are, we're gap fillers.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Charles, in your role with United Way as Community Impact Committee Chair, how did you, get involved with United Way? Is it a long story, short story, and I know you're a Tri-Cities native, so if you had a long relationship with United Way, or how'd you get involved?
Well, it was actually maybe not too long of a story, but one of the great things about folks who are involved, at the board level, United Way, is that group turns over all the time. And it's not because people, exit and get tired and leave. It's because by design, the process is intended to bring in new folks, new diversity, new views of the world. So we just serve for a very small number of years, looking to make the impact that we can in that time. So I had the unique opportunity working with a company, WRPS, just a couple of years ago, and who was a strong partner with United Way, and an opportunity opened up through that partnership to participate in the board. I jumped on it. I jumped on it the second I heard it was an opportunity because, frankly, I am a native. I'm a native who's had the benefit of having some of those safety nets, some of those programs support me as I was growing up. And whether or not I saw United Way's hand in those programs, at the end of the day, I saw, in myself, at one point, a child who was benefited from people I didn't even know were out there making a difference in his life. And so this was a chance for me to kind of come full circle and return some of that. So I jumped on it. I now work for the Central Plateau Cleanup Company, CPC Co., but continued in that role, and just excited, right? I've probably got, maybe another year or so left, but in that time, really intend to make the most of it with LoAnn and her great team at United Way.
Yeah. So thanks, Charles. We talk about community and community being a family. It's so great to be able to, somebody like yourself to volunteer to really be involved in that process and giving back to the community. LoAnn, you talked about some of the pivots that you guys made with COVID. I think one of the main things we wanted to talk to about today was this strategic initiative and kind of listening session that you guys have embarked on. And can you give us a little backstory on that? Was it something that you guys had planned to do anyway, or was it really like on COVID, kind of realizing, okay, let's focus some of our efforts on, some of the gaps that have occurred because of the pandemic? Or how did that process come about? And maybe give us some background on what you guys did and how you're working to solve some of these gaps.
It's a yes and yes. So
Okay.
About 4 years ago, we had, when we filled gaps of need in the community, we wanted to have some really concrete basis to say, what are the biggest gaps? What metrics are there that say this area is doing okay? Our safety nets are fitting this one well, but this one's bubbled up, or federal money shifted, and so now that gap is bigger. So we had 5 community-wide meetings, one in health, one in education, so in different specific areas, and they were y'all come meetings. We had, public safety, government, nonprofits, faith-based community, and just interested citizens. And we asked them, in this area, like in education or in childhood success, what are the key things that we need to watch as a community to make sure we're doing well? What are the best data sources? Because we wanted to, have valid data sources we could use, that because we don't have funds to pay people to collect a lot of data. And so we wanted to just honor those sources that were out there. So that process brought together over 100 data points. And that's a lot. Some of them weren't repeated every year. And so we went through a process with community members to narrow that down to 26 data points. And we call it our community report card. So every year we redo that. And it really tracks everything from premature births to high school graduation rates, suicide rates, domestic violence. So a number of really key issues. But we also recognize that there are some things that happen in our community that don't have good data, that don't have holistic data. Like homelessness. The schools collect information about homeless students. We do a point in time count in January of homeless persons, but that doesn't capture the whole picture of what's happening with people who have housing insecurity. And same thing with hunger. That's a really hard one to gauge, because there are a lot of people who are quietly hungry, who don't know where their next meal will come from. And so we all along have said we need to augment this data every year when we update it with talking and listening. And so this year, with the pandemic, a lot of the normal data collection sites were behind or incomplete because you can't reach people, you can't count people. School districts were having a hard time, with testing. And so it made it even more imperative that the trends we were seeing in the data, we wanted to test them, with the current reality, kind of the filter of reality, saying, we know data lags reality. So let's overlay what's really happening in our community. So Charles and his team of board members and volunteers kicked off a process where we invited nonprofits to kind of give us that current feedback. And Charles, maybe you can share a little bit about what y'all did.
No, I'd love to, and I appreciate that. So as LoAnn said, having the community report card gives us a really good objective basis on where our community's at relative to the country, the state, et cetera. But COVID was different. COVID was unique. And the analogy I like to use is that if you imagine, we're all just a grain of sand. You put all those grain of sands on what the folks who sift for gold do, that kind of, that screen, and you set it there. Well, when you shake it, that's when you start to see things come out the bottom, right? You were supported, but suddenly you shake it and things are starting to come down through the cracks. COVID was the great shake. It was the kind of upturning of some of our social supports, the community conditions. And so people begin to have this opportunity to fall through these cracks, and we needed to know where it was happening. So we did reach out. We had these listening sessions with really the front line, these nonprofits who are out there. They're dealing every day in every way with people who are most vulnerable in our community. And we asked them, what are you seeing? And there was a lot of good input that came out of that. These are all people who ultimately care about where can we best apply our resources. There's not a lot of selfishness in this bunch, right? They want where the community can best be benefited. They want the resources to go there. And so what they told us, by and large, was that it was really coming down to the family systems and family support, things like youth and foster care, homelessness. LoAnn talked about that. Is one that continued to evolve as we went into COVID, and now we're in kind of this post-COVID, where are we heading time. Housing insecurity, learning loss was kind of an interesting one. We'll have great data in a few years about whether kids are graduating and being successful in finding jobs and finding their place in our community. But that's going to be a while out. So hearing that kind of on the front end of people are dealing with families in crisis, that learning loss or mental health or those types of things were issues, was very helpful for us in honing where do we think we need to go. And it was fairly consistent, across the spectrum of these nonprofits that we talked to. So that was a big piece of what we got from these listening sessions that helped us hone our focus as we go into 2022 on families and family systems. And on top of that, we also asked, how can we help? We know that there are limited resources that a lot of these nonprofits have. How can we help you navigate through this process? So if we do have resources, if the community really comes together, and maybe there's matching grants or however it turns out, there's this upswelling of giving, what's going to help you in navigating through that process? And a couple of things that we heard out of that, one of the big ones was, give us a focus. Don't make it so broad that there's $10 million of need and there's only $1 million of give, and how does that all pan out? Give us a clear focus so that when we apply, it's competitive, but we can really get the resources that matter, right? And not have more ask than there is give. And so we really took that to heart too, and wanted to make sure that we had kind of a crisp vision for where we're going, and we could communicate that well with our nonprofit partners. So LoAnn, do you want to add on to that?
Well, sure. I was a little, you saw some worry lines pop forward because I just got a message saying internet connection unstable. So there we go. We'll just see how that goes. But speaking of unstable, that's really what we were seeing in some of the data trends before COVID, in that in the last 2 years, as we've refreshed our community report card, what we were seeing were concerning cracks in the systems related to kids and family systems. So in almost every data point last year related to kids, and this would have been reflecting data from pre-COVID, we lost ground as a community in almost every data point related to kids.
Oh, I think she did get unstable there for a minute.
Those were being.
It's like she is having some instability.
Yes.
Oh,
Yep.
good.
Look,
You
oh, you're
froze for a
back.
minute.
Yep, you're back now.
Excellent. And we have over 85,000 minors, children age 0 to 17 within the 2 counties. And I look at that as such a great opportunity because those are the people, little people now, that are going to replace all of us in our industries. They are our future workforce, our future customers, our future voters. So it's just so critical that our community does everything we can to create healthy, safe futures for them, because that's a sign of a sustainable community. And I've lived here since '86. I have 2 grandbabies. Today is the first birthday of one of them. And
Awesome.
so it gives me even more personal motivation to see what we can do collectively better to address the challenges that are faced by families and by kiddos.
That's great. Just thinking about that situation, and I think that we all collectively, get caught up in our own lives, and we forget about those families that are impacted by this. But when you guys look at the data and you look at your dashboard, what are some of the drivers? Because, just like as you look at our economy, even compared to the rest of the state or the rest of the country, even during COVID, we had some really positive indications, right? Like our unemployment, which is one measurement, it's coming down. It's everywhere you go, as far as like service industries, everyone has signs out, looking for people to go to work. Like these general economic indicators, if you just took a quick glance at it, you go like, hey, we're doing pretty good. But what does it look like? Just if you could give us a snapshot or example, LoAnn or Charles, what does it look like for some of those families? What are some of the things that are driving those disparities? Because I'd like to get into housing in a little bit and talk about that, because I think that's something that's affecting all of us across the board. You talk about homelessness and housing insecurity, but even for like the workforce, we're kind of coming up on a workforce housing challenge, and that our prices are rising so high, and folks will come here for a job, but where are they going to live? So I don't know, as you guys were talking about the data, can you share maybe some stories, or what does that look like, or what are some of those things that are driving those issues, like homelessness, food insecurity, housing insecurity? What does it look like for those families? Is that a fair question?
There are some challenges that affect different portions of our population disproportionately. So food insecurity, poverty, those are areas that have a higher percentage of persons who are non-white. And so we have some racial inequities that have been made bigger by the pandemic. But things like mental and behavioral health, those have affected every segment of our community, no matter what your income status in the home. And in fact, if you look at suicide rates and suicide attempts, they're more predominantly among Caucasian families and middle to upper income families. Yeah. And in our community, in the most recent data, 18% of 10th graders and 14% of 6th graders indicated that they thought of killing themselves. That's in our 2 counties. Yeah. And we're in the top 5 counties in the state in our per capita youth suicide attempts and completions. That is a big challenge, because it doesn't just affect the child, it affects their friends, their other students, the family members. So it's kind of the end point or a midpoint of a whole succession of challenges. We also know that stalking of children and online predators, as well as cyberbullying, has increased because of screen time. And that again affects all socioeconomic levels. We've seen an increase in human trafficking. And again, it's not just children from poverty. We've seen a lot more young adults, middle school and high school, who are leaving home during the last portion of this pandemic. Either they're being forced out because there's chaos in the home or some kind of challenge in the home, or they're choosing to leave. And those kids are prime targets for a very unhealthy short future. So those are just examples kind of at both ends of the spectrum of what's been magnified by the pandemic. Another challenge we saw among adults and kids, and I'm going to bring it back to children is obesity. And so for the first time, we have the same percentage of teenagers who are obese as their adults, and that's about a third of our population. But with moms, we have the highest average pre-pregnancy BMI, body mass index, for moms in the state. And so a mama who is obese really creates some health challenges for herself and her child. But one of the coolest things we've been able to do is partner with volunteers, and we did this before the pandemic and continuing, who are creating community gardens and showing people how to grow vegetables. And it was like last summer, I went to visit one of these, and I was just so excited because a young guy, I think he was probably 5 or 6, had to show me his tomatoes. And he did not know that tomatoes were round, because in his life, he'd seen chopped tomatoes and maybe peppers and sliced tomatoes, but he was so excited he wanted to show me his round tomatoes. And that was just a great example of how our community is coming together to address some of those food deserts where the nearest grocery store is 7-Eleven. And that's, if you have limited transportation, there's not a lot of healthy options there. So there's some great things going on to address some of these challenges. And we just help connect partners and fill in those gaps.
Charles, what about you? I read the article that you guys did that was in the Journal of Business, which is awesome. And, you shared some stories from your background, but when you from a data point of view, and you look at and these listening sessions and then the data, some of which LoAnn just talked about, but what stands out for you that are key areas that we get up, we go to work, we go home from work, and we don't see these community members, these members of our family, if you will, that are falling through the cracks. Like, what are some things that stand out for you, or that are some of your biggest priorities that you see?
Yeah, well, I think when, maybe going back to LoAnn's point and building on it a little bit, when you look at some of the challenges that our local families face, and what really stands out to me is that any unique challenge, maybe we'll focus on hunger, maybe we'll focus on learning loss, maybe we'll focus on suicide, teen suicide. Those things don't come alone. Problems tend to flock together in families. And when you picture maybe a traditional nuclear family, not like our community nuclear, but nuclear like, a husband, a wife, and a couple of kids and a dog and a picket fence, you picture a system of supports that has the resiliency to deal with the one-offs that come your way. And we've all had those, right? And we can kind of rally and we can say, gosh, you know what, this has been a really stressful week. Myself, my wife, my daughter, Claire, and son Kyle might get in the car. We might drive to Saddle Mountain and might go find petrified wood. And man, we're suddenly feeling good. We had a little bonding experience. We can go back home. Everything's okay. But it's a little bit different for some of the families at the fringes in our community. And sometimes these are families who are a single parent in the midst of COVID with a child who, maybe English is their first language, maybe it's their second language. But they're trying to go to school in the middle of COVID and having trouble learning. So they're starting to fall behind. So you got that learning loss. And now you have single parent, working parent, who's trying to help them get up to speed. And maybe that's hard for them. Maybe that's not their forte. And that could lead to a lot of mental stress, a lot of mental burden. They're already maybe having trouble putting the food on the table. And so you see those things feeding off of each other, and they exacerbate each other. And so when I think about where I'm most concerned, it's probably at those fringes where you've got groups in our community, families in our community who are subject to a few of these things. And if we don't find a way to get them connected with the right system of supports, those things tend to cascade. And then you see the bigger indicators. Then you see things like kids really starting to act out. That's when you see, the suicide rates or attempted suicides begin to go up. That's when you start to see, even the more significant indicators really start to come up on the rise, the homelessness, the severe addiction. And that's probably where I, kind of spend most of my mental calories worrying about when it comes to how can we make an impact.
Oh, that's a great example. Thanks. So, you guys talked about these issues that have come up through the listening sessions and then the data dashboard. And I just wanted to ask a quick question. I think I know the answer about United Way, but where your way to get money to the nonprofits that, like you said, are really at the front lines of these issues, that's essentially your guys' role, right? And maybe, LoAnn, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially you bring in, you talked about outside grants, which is a funding source. I know employers have an opportunity to even set up, payroll deductions for employees if they want to be a part of that in different ways to essentially raise money. And then you guys have, I would assume, grant programs where nonprofits can apply to, or how does that funding side of it? So you've kind of identified these COVID related issues that are getting worse. How do you guys fund that, or how do you raise money and then get it out to the organizations that are directly supporting these families and kids?
Boy, we couldn't have scripted this lead any better, Karl. That's so great because indeed, it starts with locals helping local. And right now we're in just the middle of our workplace campaigns and reaching out directly to local donors, telling them about the opportunities to make a difference. And so whether United Way comes to your workplace and you give directly or set up payroll deductions, an easy set it and forget it, or you attend our Festival of Trees and help local hunger and homelessness. We last year were able to take, even though local donations were down because people were worried about their futures and people worry about their job. And, it kind of occurred at the same time we had big transitions at Hanford. So we took that demonstration of local generosity and we went out to other foundations outside of the area, and we were able to bring in almost $1.5 million of other people's money to leverage local dollars. And we've taken some of that and used that outside money to go get grants, because whenever you get a grant, you have to have matching funds. So for example, one of the things that we've been really attending to is student success. That's really been, for the last 10 years, student success has been really one of our areas of focus. And we know that that is more important than ever. There are more things threatening that. And so we had a pilot project, thank you, Bill and Melinda Gates, with mentoring in the middle school. We took those lessons learned and we just brought in about $400,000 worth of other people's money. And as we speak, we have 15 AmeriCorps workers. These are adults who are now funded through this project, who are in 11 middle schools. They just started this last week. They'll be recruiting about 20 to 30 adults to come in once a week to mentor the most fragile kids. So those schools will be identifying kids who, are the most fragile, the most in danger of dropping out. And then once a week, they'll get to meet at lunchtime on the school grounds with a caring adult who can listen to them. And that is an amazing, simple, dramatic, life-changing opportunity. Just so excited to do that now. Yeah. Because in our pilot project, the kids who were mentored had better attendance, better grades, and fewer discipline challenges. And so this is just, it isn't magic, it's hard work. A lot of people work to get this here, and we're still recruiting mentors. So that's my shameless plug to go to volunteertricities.org. That's another thing we were able to do. We got a corporate sponsor during COVID. We set up a free website so that nonprofits can list volunteer needs. People can go in and find out what's happening. Companies can go in and see if there are volunteer activities. So we were just really trying to see how we can leverage local dollars and fill those critical gaps.
Okay,
that's great.
Can I feedback on that for a second? So
for sure, Charles. Yeah.
I'm glad LoAnn did the plug for volunteertricities.org, because it's a really great platform. And the messaging there, it's not just for the folks who are interested in, maybe giving some of their time. It's also for, the nonprofits who are looking for a way to kind of supercharge some of their efforts. I think a lot of us have struggled with how can I do something? How can I make an impact? And maybe money's not the right thing, through a workforce campaign or something like that. And so it's really, when we talk about the workforce campaigns, it's a part of what we're trying to facilitate here. And the volunteering piece is as big, and for some people, it's much bigger. So that volunteertricities.org, great portal, great opportunity for our community, and the whole middle school mentoring thing is really exciting to see that take off. It builds on some programs the United Way has done in the past. I'm personally excited to see it. Anecdotal time, kind of the example here. In high school, I wouldn't have gotten by if it wasn't for a little bit of help from my friends. And I think back to, one of my favorite teachers, Marcy Belgard out at Hanford High School. I think she's actually WSU affiliated now. I wouldn't have had a letter jacket if it wasn't for her kindness. So it's through those types of things that we can really make an impact on folks' lives. So if anyone's listening to this, and if you're interested, go out there and find out some information. It's a great opportunity.
Yeah, I think that's a great example, Charles. And I think, when you think about all of us in our lives growing up and being kids, I think that's a lot of times when we're talking about some of these impacted communities, the things that we forget. Like we just make this assumption that like, oh, we all grew up the same way. We all had that same nuclear family that you talked about, Charles. And, to understand that there are families that have these different drivers that cause different outcomes that's a first step. And I think it's a great point that you both made that, it's not just about, writing a check or having a payroll deduction through the employment program, but, you can also give time and those examples of changing kids' lives by mentoring, it does make such a huge difference. And I have to disclose, when I was back in Idaho, we worked regionally through the Innovia Foundation. They used to be called the Inland Northwest Community Foundation. I was on a grants committee and, kind of got involved with them. So I've learned a little bit about nonprofits and fundraising through that. My younger sister is a CFO at United Way of Greater Portland area. So when we get together, she tells me a little bit about United Way. But one of my former jobs, we were working throughout Idaho to try to connect kids while they were still in high school with jobs and making the connection to show them like these are occupations that you could go get. And here's training or education that you need past high school to qualify for that. And one of the things that we did was worked with a company in California, and they do remote mentoring, to your point, for college students. Like they have a really successful model where they do, they're not in person, they do it remotely through technology and stuff, but they've had, they can show double-digit increases in like graduation rates or class completion by just that mentoring role. And I think that's the thing we have to consider about these people that are in our community and family members, right? You look at them and you go like, why are they so different from me? It's because they had different inputs. And one way that we can help them out is to give them a different point of reference and to give them some different inputs to try to, maybe help them along like you guys are talking about. I think mentoring is such a critical need that these members of our community need. So that's a great program. I got it on my list. I think I'm going to have to check out the website and see how I could get involved. So good
Excellent.
plug for the system.
And what's great is with 11 schools, chances are very good that there's a school near where you live or work. And so you can pop over for, 1 45-minute session, be the positive person in their future, model a different career track. So many kids, their perspective of the future, of course, is shaped by their family and what they know. And that's, one little drop of sand in the opportunities that we need here in our community to fill jobs.
No, you're exactly right. And that number that you gave, and I like to go back to data because I think it's so critically important. It's so great that you guys are looking at this and having that perspective on it. But the 85,000 minors 0 to 17 years old that you brought up, LoAnn, we've just completed an economic impact study and we're working to make it public. But when you look at our demographics, that one really stands out. The way that we categorized it in our work was that this is Generation Z. And we actually, are leading the rest of state of Washington and the nation in this demographic category. And, for employers, whether it is great companies like Charles worked for and have worked for that are focused on the Hanford cleanup mission, or, other manufacturers or food production companies, we all have this need for future workforce. Like there's going to be turnover with people that are retiring out of really skilled positions, and that generation right there, that's our opportunity. So all the things that you guys are talking about, to be able to give support to kids that are going to fall out, maybe give them that career connection, maybe, hopefully give them the context for why learning and staying in school, graduating is important, let alone going on to something else. It doesn't have to be college. It could be an apprenticeship program. It could be, a technician program. So many different great programs are out there that qualify for jobs that are right here in the Tri-Cities. I think that's the thing that strikes me, is our community has so many great industries and employers. And to your point about connecting kids while they're still in the school system, whether the kids that are in crisis or just any student that's out there, show them like, hey, these are great jobs. You can get the education or training and the job right here in the Tri-Cities. You don't have to go anywhere, which is a great opportunity. So I really appreciate that data.
There are a couple of data points that support that.
Yeah.
I'm going to do a thumbs up, a thumbs down, and that's a technical term. So starting with the we have been pretty flat at 7% of kids age 16 to 19 who are not in school and not employed. So 7%. That 7% doesn't seem like a number, but if you think about the number of humans that is, their future is so differently shaped. What is their pathway to be a contributing member and self-sufficient? And we've done, my thumbs up is yay to the school districts. In spite of all the challenges, they've made incremental progress in helping more kids graduate from high school. So that is, step one. And working with Columbia Basin College and others with GED completion. So we've been doing a better job. There's still about 20% of our kids who don't graduate from high school within 5 years. But that's been getting better. So that's a 2 thumbs up, because that's a life tipping point, high school graduation or GED rate. But if you saw the Tri-State Journal of Business, Dr. Patrick Jones from Eastern just had an article on my thumbs down is we're not that young adults who graduate from high school fewer of them are going on to higher education. Fewer of them are going into the trades. Fewer of them are going to the military. So the path after high school is murky and getting worse. And so that is a critical gap that doesn't start in high school. And it starts with, those getting kids ready for kindergarten, because we have about 60% of our kids enter kindergarten not ready to learn. And that tracks to on grade and 3rd grade and math and English and to high school graduation rates. So it starts all the way down the pipeline. It doesn't just start with parents. So it is great to live in this community, because we have, I love living here because it's a big town that feels like a small town. And as a farm girl, I live in Pasco. And so we have this whole culture in Pasco of supporting each other, and Kennewick has their own culture. And as a community, it's just, there's so many opportunities to be kind and to support someone, whether it's in the grocery store or mentoring a kid at school. So I love it here. Can you tell I should be on the Chamber of Commerce or something, right, Karl?
Totally. Well, and I like your farm girl analogy too. That's you got those agrarian roots, and it's one of the things that's a huge strength of our community for sure. Let's talk a little bit about housing insecurity. We kind of nibble around the edges, but as long as we're on the data track, I think that we've all seen, like our family's lived here 18 months, and we've seen housing prices just continue to escalate. And even from an economic development perspective, we've got big projects that we've been working on for a while, and then some new ones that have come up from Dairy Gold, which is planning on building this $500 million plant in the next 2 years, to Amazon that it's projected to want to hire 1,500 employees and 2 million square foot warehouses, along with Research Fine Foods is expanding, and other great companies that are coming to the Tri-Cities, are growing in the Tri-Cities. And we look at that and we're like, that skill level that they kind of compete, kind of the entry level skill for food processing or warehousing, kind of the same group of people. When we look at our numbers, we don't necessarily have that workforce ready to go right now. And traditionally, if there was a job in the Tri-Cities, people would move in or come down, from Yakima or over from Walla Walla, up from Hermiston, But right now, where would they live? And so, from an economic development workforce, that's kind of our perspective that we're concerned about, and we're starting to work together to say, hey, what can we do to try to get ahead of this? But then, the families and the kids that you're talking about that also face, shelter insecurity. What does that look like, LoAnn? Or maybe can you give us some examples or some data that shows the challenges there for housing?
Well, again, because data lags reality, we don't have a lot of strong data points, but I do have one. Charles knows I just bubble forth with data. That's my good Coug training. But just looking at the difference between in the K-12 system. So the K-12 system is probably one of our most reliable sources. And even though we know it's undercounted because a lot of kids aren't easily identifiable if they're couch surfing or if they're stacked families, where they have multiple generations overcrowded in a single space. And we're seeing a lot more of that because of the tightness and the cost of housing. But between the 2019-20 school year and the 2020-21, because we don't have data from this year yet, they had a 340% increase in homeless students.
Oh my gosh.
In 1 year. It went from 1% of students to 5% of students in our 8 districts in the 2 counties. And so if you think about the number, that's the number of humans, that's just under 3,000 kiddos who are identified as being homeless. And what's helpful is that the ESD 123 and the school districts now really are paying attention to those kids, because they also have kids who are considered mobile, and meaning they're moving around a lot. And so really trying to find some wraparound supports. I think the Boys and Girls Club and the YMCA are great examples of, the kids go to the safe place of school. They can have breakfast and lunch. It's a safe, warm, or cool, depending on the time of year, place to be. And then if they can have support before and after school, if they're homeless or if they have chaos in the family, they have, again, a safe place to grow and to have food. And so we have churches who've stepped up with after school care, trying to help fill these gaps for to give kids a safe place to grow and make progress.
Oh, that's great. Karls, any more thoughts, or I'd like to say the data lags, but on homelessness and housing insecurity?
Yeah, like you're saying and LoAnn was saying, the data does lag. I think the one thing that I would do, kind of to bring us back to the fact that many of us just don't have a perspective of what it means. It's easy to recognize that a family or a child may suffer with hunger or homelessness, but just try to immerse yourself in that reality, right? I mean, imagine being in that position. I've been in that position where you don't have a home to go to. You got to go find a relative to live with. Maybe you're evicted from the place that you lived, or the only meal you're going to get that day is from the school, from the free meal program. It's real. And going from 1% to 5%, I think sometimes we take numbers that small and we can kind of set it aside and say it's a small number, right? That's kind of a normal number, and there's nothing normal about it. And there's nothing that we as people that care for each other and for the other folks in our community, there's nothing about it that that we should be okay with. So I think I'd maybe just draw it back down to the fact that each one of those numbers, each one of those people, they're people and they've got a story, and I think we have the capacity in our community to not have that be 5%. I really do.
Yeah, that's great.
I have an example of kind of invisible homelessness. This was I think it was last year. I was at my favorite coffee shop, and a barista, always happy and efficient and great customer service. She seemed a little down one day, and it was slow in the coffee shop. And of course, I'm not shy. So we started chatting, and she let it slip that she was living in her car. She was working 3 part-time jobs so she could keep up car insurance and her car payment, because that was the only place she had to live. And she was saving up money so she could go to the community college. But she was worried because winter was coming. And she also knew that she had to drive her car to different locations in the Tri-Cities because she slept in the trunk at night, because that was safe, People couldn't see her. And so this is a 19-year-old on her own, trying to do what's best. And she was, telling me about her younger brother who was still in a chaotic home situation. And so I was just, that was the magic of being part of United Way, because I was able to connect her with some resources to get her into CBC. And so she was able to eventually, having tracked her now for a little while, communicated with her, help get her brother into a safer place. But that's kind of the invisible homelessness that, it's not like Seattle and Portland where you see that in the freeway medians, but it's happening in our parks. As winter sets in, we're going to be, and as the eviction moratorium and starts coming to fruition, we're going to see more of that in our community. I know the school districts are preparing for it as best they can. Nonprofits in the faith-based communities are having conversations, but it's going to take much more than that to create affordable housing as a part of our system in the community.
Let's just stay on that for one more minute, and then we'll talk more about how to help. But have you guys looked at any programs like on the workforce side? We've talked about there's specific developers in other communities that really focus in on some federal programs that can do like multifamily housing that's on a sliding scale, and so they're a lot of times they're funded by federal tax credit programs that can help fund the development of the project, and then they have to manage it for like 20 years on the sliding scale. So they kind of make sure that people are different income levels, and then your rent's based on what your income level is. But if you looked at anything like that, I mean, that's kind of part of our discussion on the workforce side. But in that sliding scale scenario, you can envision opening up opportunities where people that are homeless to get something that's really, really reduced, much below market rate. But if you looked at any solutions like that, or do you guys more fund local organizations like a housing authority or somebody that are really on the front lines of that? Any thoughts about that?
So housing is complicated. And as a tri-citizen, I'm super excited that our community has finally embraced gotten over the not in my backyard somewhat. I can't say all the way, but somewhat. Sure. Because we are getting our first permanent stable housing development in Pasco for people in recovery here in Kennewick. So we're making some headways, which is just, having lived here this long, it's nourishing my soul to see that we're making those. Yeah. But they're first steps, and they're insufficient. Given the numbers of persons who are unstably housed or homeless, or like we have Elijah Family Homes. They work with people who are in recovery or coming out of the criminal justice system. It's hard enough to rent a place if you have a great track record, but what if you don't have a credit history, or you have an eviction in your past, or you're trying to escape domestic violence? Where do you go? So it really, that's what we attend to, is we look at those organizations who are looking at those specific areas of need that are bubbling up and saying, can we connect you with other resources? Can we help fill some of the gaps with our donor dollars? And of course, I'm always on an advocacy role and letter writing campaign when organizations are looking at big projects.
Yeah, for sure. We're down to about 6 minutes. Let's shift our focus now to talk about fundraising, which I know is a critical part of what you guys do. We talked about the mentoring, but anybody that may be watching this, on the webinar, on Facebook, or watching it later through YouTube, how can they be involved? How can people help out? I think you guys have given a great description today and given us some examples of, what these issues look like in our community. Because I think so many times it's pretty easy to drive on by or not even see these issues that are firsthands. And I think the examples of kids, especially as they come through the public school system, are great examples. Like, this is kind of our chance to connect with them. COVID obviously affected that. Now, hopefully we're back and we have, better mechanisms to find them, help them do these things. But how can folks, watching us today or later, get involved, help with fundraising, make donations, volunteer? What's our pitch? LoAnn or Charles, jump in there.
Charles, I'll let you go first.
All right, outstanding. So I'm gonna speak as a human being first, and as a United Way board member and participant. last year. Our community is outstanding. I mean, we have so many people who give in so many different ways and make impacts in so many different ways. And I don't want to pigeonhole it into, it's got to be through a workforce campaign, or it's got to be through United Way, or it's got to be through this nonprofit or the other. I think what I would just say as kind of a general message to anyone who happens to be, tuning in now or later, is find a way to make an impact. It could be a kid down the street. It could be volunteering at a food bank. It could be through your United Way workforce campaign. It could be going to volunteer Tri-Cities to say, I just want to get directly involved. I want to roll up my sleeves. I want to get my hands on it. I want to make a difference. So I think my challenge would be yeah, there are ways that you can give, specifically to and through United Way. We will do our part to make sure that those find their way to make the best impact possible. But setting that aside, I would just encourage people to give and be involved in whatever capacity makes sense for where they're at in life right now.
That's great, LoAnn.
You're up.
I'm just going to do like ditto, but that would be far too few words for LoAnn. One of the things the pandemic has done is really brought the nonprofit community together and more than ever before. It's just been amazing to me to see, how we're building each other up and supporting each other. And so just encourage people to give their time and talents and resources to the causes you care about. We, of course, honor all the donors who want to help us fill gaps. That makes it a really critical difference. So we think of it as a +1. Support your charity of choice, and then also provide us the capacity to be able to leverage the local dollars to bring in other dollars to fill those gaps. And two other pitches. One is keep your eyes and ears open for opportunities to be kind. And the second really is that we live in extraordinary times where we can make a difference in what's going to happen 5, 10, 15 years from now by just really paying attention to what's happening to our kids and our families. So if there's something you can do in your own family to strengthen it, or if you need resources, call 211 to connect with resources to support a family, maybe a neighbor or someone you see who's struggling in some way. Resources, because donors are generous with their time and money, they're out there. We just want to make sure the bridges are easy to connect when support is needed. Because you never know when something will happen in your life when you're going to need something.
Great point. Well, Charles and LoAnn, you guys have been really, really great today, and I appreciate your time and just sharing both the examples, because I think that really helps us, right? Like we see, maybe a workforce campaign about United Way. We're like, okay, I want to do good, I want to give, but I think to give the examples of people and families and kids in our community helps people connect with that. And to a certain extent, we're not talking about individual people, but to put a face on what does that look like and why is it important that I both give financially and even think about volunteering and being involved. So you guys have done a great job for our community and for the United Way of Benton and Franklin counties. And I really want to thank you guys for your time. And this morning, we got like 1 minute left. Charles, you want to give us some closing remarks? And it can be go Huskies if you want to, or go Dogs. So totally up to you.
I will say this, united, we can conquer anything. So no matter who wins in November, and it will be the Huskies, it's going to be a really great game and one that we can all enjoy together.
Great point. The Apple Cup does bring us together for sure. And LoAnn, any closing comments and even a rebuttal to Charles?
Well, Charles, I always come prepared. So ta-da! Go Cougs and go Tri-Citizens. It's a great place to live and work. We can all make it even better.
A great point. Our family loves being here, and the Tri-Cities is something that with TriDec we're out there selling every day. So great examples. Thank you both again for your time. Thanks for your great work with United Way and to help our community, and just encourage everybody to check out some of the links Tracy put in the chat so you can get involved and help the United Way and help our community overcome some of these challenges that we got. So thank you both again, and everybody have a great weekend.